There we go. Okay. Good evening and welcome to tonight's program, An Evening with Barry Carter. I'm Tom Ankner, Director of the Charles F. Cummings New Jersey Information Center at the Newark Public Library. Before we get started, I just wanted to encourage you all to fill out your census forms. Filling out the census is one small but very important thing everyone can do right now to help our city and our communities. If you haven't done so yet, please go to my2020census.gov and fill out the brief questionnaire. The information you provide affects funding for healthcare, transportation, your local schools, and many other needs. Remember, my2020census.gov. It is safe, secure, and confidential. Tonight, we have a treat for you. Barry Carter has taken time out from his new job to join us. Barry worked at the Star Ledger for 30 years in Newark that didn't always show up in other news outlets. Tonight, he's going to talk about some of those stories, tell us about what he's doing now, and answer a few other questions. Barry, welcome. Thank you for being here tonight.
Hey, thank you for having me, Tom. Appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, great. Thanks. Okay. So you recently started a new career. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about what you're doing now?
Yes, just a month ago, I joined the Public Information Office for the Newark Department of Public Safety. So I'm sort of kind of on the other end of the spectrum of my career, where I deal with my colleagues in the media when they have press inquiries about things going on in the city. So that's what I'm doing now. And
Okay.
so far so good. I'm enjoying myself, having a good time, learning how they do things around there.
Okay. So it's a big change though, right? You're kind of doing the opposite of what you were doing, right? Sort of.
Yes, it is the opposite of that. I was just looking for a new opportunity to try something different. I had been in the business for journalism for 35 years, 32 of those years or 31 of those years at the Star Ledger. And so it got to the point where I felt like, I had a nice ride, a nice run in the business. And I just thought it was time to move on, to do something different. I had a great time. I still would like to write at some point, do different things, do some different kind of writing. But it just felt like this was a good time for me to, leave on my own terms and leave on a high note. And again, try something totally different out of my wheelhouse, and just to see how that goes.
Well, good luck. I hope it works for you. You were missed, though. Believe me, you're already missed. Local institution when you were at the Ledger. Your column covered events across the state, but Newark was a major focus of your work. You highlighted people who were working hard to improve their community, to create positive change in a city with a lot of problems. Was there a philosophy or an overarching idea behind the kind of subjects you chose for your columns?
For me, it was really simple, just to try to, find, compelling stories about ordinary people who just had, fascinating lives. It could be something, small or simple to, something issue oriented. And I always like to, to find something about, the little person, just to shine some attention their way. And, somebody that normally doesn't, people, we all know who they are in our travels. We just don't write about them all the time. They could be, the neighbor on your street, somebody standing at the bus stop, somebody in your church, somebody you work with, and there's just something about their life or how they've lived their life that could be fascinating. And if it touched me, then then I could touch you. And so that's what I tried to do. I didn't focus a lot on organizations. I mean, I would write about them, but everybody has an organization and they all do good work. So if I did write about an organization, it would have to be something that stood head and shoulders apart from what everybody else was doing. But again, my focus was mostly on people. Of course, I would find some issues, but I always would gravitate back towards just writing about the ordinary person in the city or across the state.
Okay, all right. Okay. It's interesting. You didn't grow up in Newark. You're not from here originally, right? You're from Queens originally?
Yeah, I grew up in Long Island City, Queens, right by the 59th Street Bridge, housing development there called Queens Bridge. Um, right on the water. Out my bedroom window, I could look straight into Manhattan and see the skyline. There was a big park across the street. Um, I mean, the proper name was Queensboro, I think Queensboro Park. We called it the River Park because it was right on the East River.
Uh-huh.
And you could just walk to the edge of the river, and I could just see Manhattan as clear as day. I could see Lower Manhattan to my left. Right in front of me, I would see Roosevelt Island, and then right behind Roosevelt Island is the rest of Manhattan.
Mhm.
And like I said, the bridge is right there. The tram that runs from Roosevelt Island into Manhattan, I could see that. The people on the tram. You've probably seen it in movies.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's where I grew up, right there. We go right there in Queensbridge.
So where after you left Queens, I guess you were in Queens until the end of high school, right? So where'd you go to college?
Right. I graduated from Jamaica High School, which is another section of Queens. But then I went to Howard University from 1980 to 80, December of 84. So my major was journalism, minor was political science. In hindsight, I probably wished it could, I wished my minor probably could have been like maybe English or history. But at the time, people were saying political science was a good minor to go with journalism. And at the time, that's when a lot of people were getting into journalism because of Watergate, and people wanted to be like an investigative journalism. I mean, that wasn't my goal to be like an investigative journalism. I just was interested in journalism from like high school, and writing short stories in English classes, and just becoming interested in the news and the world around me, during that age. And then I just wanted to see where it would take me. And at the time, I also had a real keen interest in photography. So I was thinking I was going to be a photojournalist, take pictures and then write about them. But I had a teacher who suggested that I just focus on one, because he was saying the market at the time wasn't big on photojournalism. I mean, I didn't. What did I know? So I figured I would just focus on journalism, and then take pictures as a hobby. I never really got back to the picture part. I just focused on reporting and writing.
Although I've seen you at events in recent years, and you were actually taking pictures for some of your own columns, right? I mean, I think that's you even just with the phone. But I mean, you're like, I've seen a lot of reporters do that now, rather than having a photographer there. You just take pictures for your own stories, right? You had to do.
Yes, during
Yeah,
like the digital age,
yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
that when I made the transition from, because I was with the start on the newspaper side of the equation for like 29 years, and then the last 2 years I joined NJ Advanced Media. So in joining them, part of my duties was, if there wasn't a photographer to be there on the assignment, then I would use the camera phone to take the picture and upload it into the system, and do that. I still don't feel like I was a great photographer, but that was part of the job. So
Yeah.
that's what I did or had to do.
And so before you came to the Ledger, where you worked at a couple other papers, right? Before you started at the Ledger.
Yes, when I left Howard, I was finished in December of '84. So my first job was in this little town in southeastern Ohio. It was called the Marietta Times, real close to West Virginia, separated by the Ohio River. It was a Gannett-owned paper, small paper, uh, 2 hours from Columbus, 3 hours from Cleveland, 4 hours from Cincinnati. So got this city kid from New York, went to school in Washington, D.C., and here I am in little old Marietta
Yeah.
in the summertime, they would have a festival, the Washington County Fair. Or no, I think it was called the Stern Wheel Festival. So they would have these stern wheel boats come paddling down the Ohio River, and they would dock on the banks of the Marietta, and I think they would play this like bluegrass music and have ice cream socials. So it was interesting. It was really interesting. I mean, it wasn't a shock to me because as a kid in the summers, I used to go to my grandmother's house in a little town in South Carolina called Cowpens. And that's just how it sounds, Cowpens. And so I was used to the small town feel. I mean, there was no diversity in Marietta. I was, the only black guy at the paper. There was very few blacks in town, but everybody was nice. Everybody treated me friendly. But I stayed there a year, and I moved to Flint, Michigan. And I was at a paper called the Flint Journal. And, I had rural beats in towns outside of Flint. And then I think my last year there, I was there from 86 to 89. I moved to like the education beat and covered education that last year. And I was looking to leave to come back east. And wound up getting hired in 1989 after a tryout. I think I was here for about a week for a tryout with the Star-Ledger. That's when Mort Pye was still the editor. And so I guess they were pleased with what I did, and they hired me in 1989.
So you started your column in 2004. What did you do when you first started at the Ledger? What kind of work were you doing?
When I first got to the Ledger, I was I was a general assignment reporter, which I liked because it was a nice variety of all different kinds of stories. Each day was different. And I was bouncing around the state, just doing different kinds of stories. And then the City Hall reporter, a guy named Fred Bird, passed away. So then they stationed me at City Hall when Sharp James was mayor. And I was in City Hall for about 2 years. And I wanted to go back to being a general assignment reporter. So I switched back out and became that. They got somebody else to do City Hall. And so I was the City Hall reporter. I mean, not the City Hall reporter. I was doing general assignment reporting again for a number of years. And then I wound up becoming the police reporter, covering Newark police for, I forget, maybe 2-3 years or so. Because the police reporter we had, she moved away. So I wound up doing the police beat for a little while. And then after that, the column came around. Well, after that, I went back to doing more general assignment reporting, but it was more so targeted within Essex County. So I was focusing on, towns like, Irvington and Orange and East Orange and of course, stories out of Newark.
Okay. So you did a variety of things before you started the column.
Yes, I sure did. From courts to demonstrations to, again, like issue-oriented kinds of stories. So yeah, bounced around pretty good around the state, or I might have filled in in the State House down in Trenton. If one of the reporters there who covered like state politics wasn't in that day or was on vacation, so I did that every now and then, not a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the idea for your column when you were first approached?
The idea was they said whatever it is that you wanted to be about.
Oh, okay. So you were given a pretty wide berth then. That's
yeah,
good.
Exactly.
Okay.
So since I like writing about people, I said I'm gonna find some interesting folks to write about, and it was first started in Newark This Week. It ran every Thursday on the front of the Newark This Week section. It was delivered to or circulated to Belleville, Bloomfield, Nutley, East Orange, and Orange. And so I was doing the column, but I was also still being a reporter within Essex County. So I was still writing like my daily stories, and then I had to find time to write the column. And again, like I said, that ran every Thursday, and I think it was for about 2 years, 3 years or so, because then changes started going on at the paper, and then so that section dissolved, but they still wanted me to write the column, and so they took the column and put it on the Essex County page, and so that's where it was running for, I guess, a few years, and then I got assigned to there was more reorganization within the paper, and I got assigned to David Tucker. He was my editor, and so my column became statewide, and it would run on the New Jersey page, and so the New Jersey page runs statewide. So it would either appear on the New Jersey page, and if it was, real good, then it would run it on the front page. So it only ran in those two places.
So I want to ask you about a few of your columns that you've written over the years, the ones that are particularly memorable or might have had a big effect. First of all, Leon Hickman. Can you talk a little bit about Leon Hickman?
Yeah, I like Mr. Hickman. He was fantastic. I stumbled across him because, I always talk to a lot of people just picking their brain about, who are interesting folks in the city to write about. And, sometimes people can think of somebody right off the top of their head, or they may, need a few days or a week. But this one lady I know, Judith Favors, she said, you should write about Mr. Hickman. And then I said, well, what is it about him? And she said, he's the cutest little old man that you ever want to meet. And all he does all day is clean his street. And she said, you got to go see him to understand what I'm talking about. So I took a ride up to South 7th Street between South Orange Avenue and 13th Avenue. And there was this little guy with a rake in his hand. He had on a flannel shirt and a bomber type a hat, looked like one of those airplane pilot kind of a hats. And he had a rake and a garbage can and a push broom. And he was just pushing, he was sweeping, sweeping the street all by himself. I was able to go through my little files and just to sort of kind of find a picture of him, just sort of kind of give you an idea. So
Okay.
that's him.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so I said, Mr. Hickman. And he said, yes, indeed. And that's how he always addressed people. Yes, indeed. He said, that's me. I'm Brother Hickman. And I said, Judith Favors tells me that you clean the street all day by yourself. He said, yes, I do. He said, cleanliness is next to godliness. And he says, whenever I see dirt, I pick it up. And I said, well, Mr. Hickman, do you just clean your side of the street? Now, South 7th Street is really, really long. And I said, do you just clean your side of the street? And then he says, well, Brother Carter, he says, why shave one side of your face and don't shave the other? And he cracked me up, and we just had a great conversation about his life. And he was a deacon in the church, and the church was a few doors down from his home. And that's, he did that kind of work even after I forget what his occupation was when he was a working man, but when he did get off work, he would clean the street on the weekends and or after work, and he just wanted to keep the block as nice as he wanted to be. And so when he was retired, he was in his 80s, and that's what he would do. And after he finished, he'd read his Bible. Well, he started his day reading the Bible, and then he finished cleaning up and go get him some cashews and a can of Pepsi soda and sit on the porch and admire his handiwork. And nobody helped him. He didn't want no help. And I just thought it was just an interesting human interest story about an old guy in the city who, if everybody did the same thing that he did, there would be no line of demarcations between one town and another, because everybody can can do what he did, just just pick up some litter and put it in the trash. And so I just found his story, that simple little act, fascinating. And people read the story, they enjoyed it. Somebody offered to buy him a case of soda so he can just so he can relax after he finish his work.
Keeping his corner of the world clean, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what about Caddy Jordan?
Yes, Miss Katie.
Or Katie Jordan, sorry.
Katie, that's right. She again somebody sent me an email about her or left me a phone message, and I went to go. She lives on Irvine Turner Boulevard, and she still lives there, as a matter of fact. And I went to go talk to her, and she was just telling me that people knock on the door to get something to eat, and if they're hungry, she'll let them in, and they could wait for the food that she's prepared, and she'll give them a styrofoam tray, and then they can walk away with it, or they're welcome to sit down at her dinner table and eat right there. What was really interesting about her, she's such a genuine soul. She did not expect to be doing this because she was following in the footsteps of her mother. Her mom did it for years. Her mother was a very spiritual woman, but Miss Katie didn't like it when her mom would feed, just complete strangers and let them in the house, because she felt as if they were taking advantage of her. Some of them had, substance abuse issues, or, might have been, in that life. But a mother just had a big heart and a big spirit. And I guess at the end of the day, she rubbed off on her daughter, because when her mother died, the people kept knocking. And so Miss Katie would open the door, and she just, followed suit like her mom. And, she referred to, the men as her son. She referred to the ladies as her daughter. She would say, "Daughter, come on in," or "Son, how you doing?" And she still calls me son to this day. And we became friends. And, I continued, I would send her Mother's Day cards. And, I did one, sent her a card this past Mother's Day. And so we had nice conversations, and she was sad to know that I wasn't going to be at the paper anymore. But a real sweetheart of a lady. They don't make them like that. She's just so down to earth and genuine.
Mm-hmm. So this is not down to earth and genuine, but this is somewhere where you had an impact. Writing about toxic fumes in the Ironbound.
Oh yeah. Yes, it was a husband and wife couple. Somehow I got an email of theirs, and they were explaining how, they bought these homes in the Ironbound section of Newark on Manufacturer's Place. And they had been there it was like it was a short street, Manufacturer's Place, next to because there's a lot of industry down there. It's like next to a company where a lot of trucks go in and out of. And they were nice looking homes, but they got a letter from the DEP like 12 years later saying that their homes were built on top of a contaminated site, and running underneath their homes was contaminated groundwater. And the groundwater had these vapors, vapors inside the water called, they called it TCE, stands for trichloroethylene. And the problem is that the vapors, if it can seep up into the home, you're not really it's kind of like odorless. And if you had like exposure for a while, DEP was saying it could lead to liver damage, kidney damage, and worse, cancer. And so, the people were like, really, really upset. The company that used to be there, that occupied the land where their houses were, was called Ronson Metal Corporation or Company,
Yeah.
or Metals Company. They they made cigarette lighters and
Yeah,
other
the famous cigarette lighter company
right,
that was based in Newark for decades. Yeah. Yeah.
right. So they were in Newark from the 1950s until they closed in 1989. They were supposed to um, clean up the contaminated water, the groundwater, along with other things that they were supposed to do before, shutting down. DEP had a bunch of requirements for them, but apparently they didn't clean up the contaminated groundwater. I guess
Yeah.
they didn't cap it the way they were supposed to, or do what they were supposed to do, and so and DEP didn't follow up to see if they had done it. So many years passed. So between 1989 and 2012, nobody really followed up from the state. And so the state, I guess, one day or that year decided to check on the different brown sites, contaminated sites that were located throughout New Jersey. And they decided to go back to this one. And that's when they discovered that this trichloroethylene. And so the residents are like, what are we going to do? I'm not going to be able to sell my home. Who's going to want to buy my home? Because of this new information and the solution that the state had, and the residents didn't have an option. They built this elaborate ventilation system where they would have this PVC pipe going into your garage basement. They would like dig a hole and put this PVC pipe, and about 40 feet of it would snake out from the garage up alongside your house, to this vent above the roof, and it was like a fan that would suck the vapors from underneath your garage out into the atmosphere. So that was the solution.
Oh, wow.
So people, they had no choice but to get it, but then they felt like the property values to their home was just going to be destroyed, because if somebody came looking at their home, then they're going to ask, well, what's this thing on the side of the house? And then they would have to explain. Yeah, so that's what happened with that story. And I think now that story ran on the front page. That story ran on the front page. Yeah, so it's like
And that was an example of somebody turning to you because they needed help, and they were hoping that getting some publicity for this situation of theirs would maybe help them, right? Yeah.
Because I wasn't quite sure exactly, what the situation was. I had to do a lot of research, and had to talk to the city of Newark about it, and talk to DEP and try to find out who dropped the ball in terms of following protocol, or not keeping up with Ronson, and so the city was saying some of the blame had to do with the state, and then the state was saying, well, no, some of it's your responsibility. So they was kind of pointing fingers at one another, and in the meantime, the residents are stuck in a situation. Yeah, so that's what happened there.
Can you talk a little bit about Sheila Tolor?
Oh yeah, she was a senior citizen living in a senior building in Orange, New Jersey, Orange Housing Authority. Very independent, active lady, healthy, and her daughters, she was real close to her daughters, Cheryl Toller and Luana Burks. Cheryl was an attorney. Luana Burks was a police officer, I believe, is in Plainfield. And they was close to the mom, and they would check on their mom, frequently. And so one week, Luana went to go check on her mom. Well, she called her mom, and her mom didn't pick up the phone. So she went by to see what was going on. And she knocked on her mom's door, and her mother didn't answer. And so then she thought her mother was at a neighbor's apartment, like on another floor. And so on her way to the other floor, she ran into a resident in the building and said, they didn't tell you? And she said, tell me what? She said, your mother died last week. And
Wow.
and so she was blown away because the office, the building has their information, that has the daughter's emergency contact numbers.
Yeah.
Nobody notified them, and they just couldn't understand why nobody contacted them. And the housing authority, the Essex County medical examiner, and the police department, they all had their own protocols, but none of them included notifying next of kin. And so they were pointing the fingers at one another. So the two daughters were determined to not let this happen to somebody else. So they got in touch with the Assemblywoman Grace Spencer at the time, and she read my story and started doing research, only to learn that there wasn't anything on the books regarding like senior buildings or assisted living facilities in terms of notifying next of kin. And so she introduced, legislation to correct that. I think it was co-sponsored by Cleo Tucker, and their mother died in 2014. So 3 years later, in 2017, Governor Christie signed it into law that facilities, senior facilities, assisted living facilities, or any kind of nursing homes would have to notify the next of kin if someone dies. And
So that's one of your columns that actually resulted in a change in the law, right? It's
yes, which was
yeah.
surprising. I mean, I wasn't expecting it, because I did the story in 2014, and they told me that they were going to try to get something done, and they kept in touch with me periodically to let me know what was going on. And then when there was movement towards this actually becoming a law, they they let me know again, and I was like, wow. And so it was really a gratifying feeling to know that story that I wrote, the end result was that a law got passed that would help other people to not be in the same situation as they were at the time, because it was like really, really painful for them. And
I bet, yeah.
it,
Not finding out that your mother had died until a week later, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
she was in the morgue for like 6 days, and they didn't know, they didn't know.
Yeah.
And but out of tragedy came something positive.
Yeah.
You know, even though I know they, still, even to this day, still miss their mother dearly.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about Akbar Cook and West Side High School?
Yes, he's great.
You had some company on that story too. A little person by the name of Oprah Winfrey, also. Right.
Yeah. What makes Akbar Cook so special to me is that he doesn't seek press. He doesn't, look for a story to be written about him. If he sees a need, he just goes and does it. And I heard about him through a mutual friend of ours. I didn't know Akbar Cook at the time, and he just told me about this guy who has this program called Lights On, and he keeps the gym open at the school from 6 p.m. to midnight to keep kids off the street. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I still wasn't sold on it as a story. I thought it was a nice thing. What piqued my interest was when he said to me that it's a long day for him. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, I live in the Poconos. And he says he drives from the Poconos to Pottersville, New Jersey, where he was the director of Life Camp. So it's like an outdoor camp for kids in Newark who lived in the city, and you bring them out to Pottersville so they can have a day of being in the country. So he ran that program all day, worked all day, and then that was about an hour drive from the Poconos to the Pottersville, and then he would keep coming north, leaving Pottersville probably around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, so he can get to Newark by 5:30 to open up the school by 6. And these kids would come and they would be there till midnight, playing sports or video games. And it was really a nice setup because they were on school property. They was in a safe environment. They got fed. They had, sandwiches, something to drink. And then the food that was the unopened food that was left over, after the kids left the school, then Akbar cook would take that food down to Penn Station. So now it's like midnight or after midnight, and he's giving out these sandwiches, these leftover sandwiches to to homeless folks at Penn Station. Then he would get in his car and drive all the way back to the Poconos, talking to his wife on the phone, so he wouldn't fall asleep. And then he'd start that all over again the next day. He did it for the summer. And so as you know, I was the first one to report that story. Nobody really wrote about it, but it got like sort of kind of like a second life when he started this other program where he installed washing machines inside of the old football locker room in the school in the basement. And the washing machines was because kids who didn't have like clean clothes were getting teased by other students, and so they was sort of kind of getting bullied. So he felt like, I'm going to eliminate this bullying, and kids can come wash their clothes at school. So Ellen, that story went viral. I was the first one to write that story as well, and so it went viral. Ellen DeGeneres saw it, or somehow saw it, and she had him on the show. She gave him a $50,000 check but she also heard about Lights On through, from the washing machine story. So that's how Lights On got sort of kind of second life. So she gave him $50,000 for Lights On, and then she gave him another $50,000 like several months later, because the washing machine program was going well, and so that was like a total of $100,000 within a matter of months. I think it's probably like the end of December or something like that. Into December of 2018, I want to say. And then Oprah heard about it 5 months later. So that May of like 2019, Oprah, she heard about it, surprised the kids and the kids at the school, and she surprise visit, and she announced the $500,000 gift towards the Lights On program, and everybody was going crazy. And so I heard somebody was telling me I should be at the school at a certain time because something's big gonna happen. So that's how I wound up there, and it was just me and Gail King from CBS. So that was a lot of fun. I got a chance to ask Oprah a few questions about Mr. Cook, and he was just so thrilled and excited, and of course the kids were going crazy. And little do people know that was the fourth story that I had written about Cook, Akbar Cook, because there was two other stories. One about lockable cell phone pouches. He was having an issue at the school where he had some kids who were chronically late coming to school. So he figured that if he get these lockable cell phone pouches, he would have the kids put the phones inside the pouch. The pouches would close like magnetically, and the kids would keep the pouch all day long, but they couldn't open it, so they wouldn't have access to their phone. And at the end of the day, they would bring the pouch back to him, and he would have this like electronic device to open it up. But the beauty of the pouch was that kids found themselves focusing more on schoolwork than fiddling with their cell phones, throughout the day.
Kept them off the phones during the day.
Yeah. And and the last story I did on him was one of the four was I had gone to one of his, because he and I by then had become, like I would say, really good friends. So I went to go see his high school during the playoffs, and the team had on pink sneakers, and that was the first thing that struck me as when I walked. I said, why do they have on pink sneakers? Everybody, the kids on the bench, kids in the game had on these pink high top sneakers. And I asked the vice principal, and he began to explain to me that the coach from Morristown Beard High School, a guy named Eddie Franz, who was like a mentor to Akbar Cook, they found out that he had been diagnosed with cancer. And the kids knew Coach Franz because Morristown Beard and Westside High School would scrimmage one another from time to time. And so they wanted to do something to honor him during the season. So they said, hey, Coach, why don't we wear pink sneakers? And it was during a championship run, and they wound up winning the championship that year. It was back-to-back, so that was the second championship that they won. So, but yeah, so that was like one of those other stories about Akbar. I wrote about him.
What about Willie Clark and Habitat for Humanity?
Willie, real quickly, somebody emailed me and said, older gentleman who's retired helps Habitat for Humanity build homes. And a lot of young families were so like indebted to him for showing them, it was like their first home, ever. He was spiritual guy, he prayed first before, they would do work. And when he was a carpenter, I believe most of his life. And in retirement, so he retired after so many years. And but I guess he just wanted to do something to stay busy. And he hooked up with Habitat for Humanity and their building program, and he was running it, and all of these different corporations or volunteers, they would have to go to him, and he would show them how how to put the beam up or how to hammer a nail, and everybody he came in contact with, they just all loved the guy. And so that story drew a lot of attention. Other media, came. I know Channel 7 came out to do a story on him, and everybody just called him Mr. Willie.
Mr. Willie. Okay.
And unfortunately, like a few years later, he passed away. Somebody sent me an email that said he passed away, and so I stopped by the viewing and met some of his family members. Really good guy. Enjoyed. He was kind of reminded me of Mr. Hickman in a way.
Mm-hmm. Leon Hickman, yes. So what is your most memorable column? What's the one that you remember
most
fondly, but what do you think is the most memorable?
I would say, man, I'm going to give two quick ones if you don't mind.
Sure.
One was in 2006, there was an orange police officer, a guy named Karan Shields, and he was killed in the line of duty. He had a young family, wife, 3 kids, a son. The youngest son, I believe, had just several months old. Anyhow, so my assignment was to after the phone calls, after the visits, to see what life would be like for this young lady, after everybody goes away. And it was around the time, maybe about a year or two after my wife had passed away. So I was very familiar with what she was feeling and going through, her emotions. And so the first time that I met her, she asked me if my wife was a teacher at Cleveland Street School. And I said, yeah. And she said, is her name Juanita Carter? And I said, yes. She said she was my daughter's teacher. And so that's why, that story was like very, very memorable to me. And because it was just this, connection that you just never expect. And so it turned out to be a really, really good story that ran on the front page about what life was like for her, raising three children and, navigating life, without her husband, who's a well-loved, well-respected police officer, known in the community. And so that was memorable. The other one is a guy named Mark Newton. He's a litigious, not I should say, well, yeah, he is litigious. Tenacious is the word I should say, used. A tenacious pro se litigant. And so he had a 19-year history of avoiding paying rent to landlords. And what he would do is move into your place. The landlords accused him of changing the locks, damaging the apartment, and then he would call code enforcement and say that the landlord rented him a substandard apartment. And then the landlords would get upset. He would tie the landlords up in court with delays because he represented himself. And it would take a little while, to get him evicted. And when I came across him, he was in a house that was owned by the bank, Wells Fargo. And it took Wells Fargo about 3 years, to finally get him out there, to get him out.
In an apartment he had no lease to or anything. He just kind of set up house there, right?
No, he would get a lease.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
He would get a lease, but he would move in, and the landlords would accuse him of changing the locks and then damaging, damaging the place, and saying he rented them a substandard apartment so then he would stop paying rent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, landlords have to get an attorney and then take off their job and come to court. And, he was a pro se litigant. And so he didn't have the same attorney fees as a landlord, because he would file for a waiver. He would file for indigent status and get approved, because when you file papers in court, it costs money.
Mm-hmm.
But he was very, very memorable. He was probably my most memorable.
He knew how to work the system.
Kind of human interest story. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Is there something you didn't get a chance to write about that you wish you had?
No, I guess
No? Okay.
I think when I thought about that, but I was just trying to pick my brain if there was something that I wanted to get to that I couldn't get to. I can't off the top of my head think of it. I think I covered a lot of ground. Just like a lot of the stuff, like I was saying, is just stories that moved me, and stories that are just have strange coincidence. Like you wouldn't think, like in a million years, something like the story about Giselle Clemens could happen. Like her mom was killed 10 years ago when two guys in a stolen car crashed into her car, and her mom, it was over at the Weequahic Park, and so one of the passengers in the car was getting released from jail, and Giselle Clemens, she was from Newark, knew that the guy was getting out. So she wrote a compelling Facebook post reaching out to her Facebook friends to say, does anybody know of any resources out there that would help this young man stay on the right path and live a full life? She forgave him for being partly responsible for the death of her mother. So it was just a fantastic story about grace and forgiveness. We always talk about forgiving people, but to actually do it and put words to actions, and that's what she did, and so it was really, really incredible. So that was like one of those kinds of stories that you just you know, didn't think what happened. There was like another one, more like South Jersey, a young kid who lived in Carneys Point, New Jersey, which is, I guess, near
I've heard of
Delaware.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
He grew up on a boat with his father, a fishing boat, and him and his dad went everywhere on that boat, and that was some of his most favorite memories. So when he became a teenager, his dad, I think his dad got cancer and passed away. But before he passed away, his dad sold the boat. And so kid figured, like, I'm never gonna see this boat again. So you fast forward maybe like 5, 6 years, the kid's like now 21, and he still goes boating. And he was looking for some crab traps, and he saw a Facebook ad for crab traps in West Deptford Township. And this guy named Tim Vetter was selling these crab traps, and he goes to his house, walks in the guy's backyard, and he walks past this boat to see the crab traps. And he asked the guy, he said, "Is that your boat?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "That's my daddy's boat." He said, "I grew up on that boat." He said, "Some of my most famous memories, were growing up on that boat." And the kid was crying, and the guy, Tim Vetter, just couldn't believe it. And he says, "Can I buy that boat from you?" And the guy Tim said, "Hey, you can have it." He said, "Just write me a check." The kid said, "I'll try to get a loan from the credit union." And he says, "Well," and then Tim said, "If you don't get approved, you can just write me some payments, and we can work out an agreement." So when the story ran of this strange coincidence of this boat that this kid thought he would never see again, a reader from Belleville saw the story and reached out to me and said, "I want to buy that boat for that kid, so he can be reunited with his daddy's boat."
Wow.
And $3,000, $3,000, and so I put them in touch with one another. I gave them each other's telephone number, and so I guess they made it happen.
Oh, great. That's great. He got his boat back.
Got his boat back. Yeah, exactly.
So right before you left the Ledger, you wrote a number of columns about the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in keeping with ordinary folks who just touch your heart, Tanya Belts and her husband, they started an organization called Treehouse, and they were just going nonstop, feeding people. Whenever their phone rang, they would mainly seniors, because seniors who couldn't get out, and they were just getting donations from all over the place, and they would from sun up to sundown. They was cooking food, delivering food, and for them, doing this kind of work was like a calling for them, because they told me, Tanya, that is, she told me that she was in the food lines once upon a time, and she remembers that feeling and how it was. And she said, she had to talk with God and said, if I ever get out of this situation, I'm gonna, help other people. And so that's what she did. And they're known down by Penn Station a lot, where they give out a lot of food, they give out a lot of clothes. They just do it because it's the right thing to do. They don't do it for celebration or looking for a story. And so I hung out with them during the beginning, on the front end of this pandemic. I followed them to Montclair to deliver some food, to a women's shelter, but the women's shelter couldn't accept the food because they didn't get approval. But then, so they had somewhere else to go to take that same food back to Newark, and they stopped off at a senior citizens building or in the North Ward. And all the while, their phone, people are still calling them to see what they had. And even before they packed up and left, some people were coming by their I guess you would call it their headquarters, off of Sanford Avenue, looking for stuff. Yeah, so that's their base of operation. So just down earth couple, genuine, big hearts, and like not everybody can do that kind of work, because it's tiring. It's tiring.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I wrote about a guy, Sadi Davis, um, ex-gang member, gang leader, I should say. He once he got out of that life, he got a job at a restaurant in Montclair. He was started off doing food prep. They taught him how to cook. He would say chef, but I don't know if that would be the right word. But he knew how to make all of the meals, as the top chef knew how to make. And so it changed his life. And then when the pandemic hit, he got laid off. So somebody read the story, and they wanted to send him, some money to help him out with rent or whatever he needed it for. So some readers, contacted me, and I contacted him, and he had a PayPal account, and so those transactions took place. But that was like a really nice story, because he just, here's somebody that turned his life around and wasn't going to go back to that life, even though he was out of work. He was just, he was determined not to be that guy anymore. And so that was pretty moving. That was pretty moving. Yes.
Well, I think we're just about out of time. We're just about at 7 o'clock. So this was terrific. Thank you so much for doing this. And you are, I wish you luck in your new job, but already missed in Newark. There were a couple of things I wanted to call you about to suggest stories. I know you wrote something for me a couple of months ago when we began an archive of COVID-19 stories for the library. We did a column for us, and that got us a lot of, we got several people contributed, made contributions as a result of your column. So,
okay.
We're missed. Nobody has stepped into your feet yet. I hope somebody does soon. So good luck, and thank you for doing this.
Hey, thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate the compliment. Very kind of you. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who was here tonight. Good night. Stay safe, everyone.